Um, Hello, everybody. Is that right? Right, exactly. Things like that. It's pretty common with builds. It's kind of an easy way to illustrate what I mean. That's why I call it law of implication, right? Is that you're attracting into your life the implications of your thoughts. Like I talked about early on in alchemy, where I talked about helplessness and how, remember the defense and the defense against the defense. And when people think about how they're not helpless because they have various defenses or resources, right? Or a fortress or whatever, money, then that actually implies that we're helpless. If we say, like, I'm not helpless because I have money or because I am dating this person or married to this person, then it implies that we're fundamentally helpless. I think you should have sound, uh, Irene. Okay, let's see here. All right, got a got a couple of slides that I might bounce back and forth with here. Where there's been a couple of questions about scenarios and scenario walkthroughs and trying to understand that. I think I'm also thinking we can go straight after taking a look at what I mean by self-image even further and kind of developing an idea of a self that we can kind of build for ourselves based on method. But then I'm going to skip down here. Let me just talk a little bit about scenarios. Uh, all right, we basically the consciousness field distinction that I'm giving you, it it's really like kind of the end all and be all of once you understand that and understand to build off of that, then then you're in a whole new ball game or whatever. And so I'll look to develop that a little bit further. So we like literally walk around in our consciousness field, right? In a sense, right? Like if you walk around a room or you look at your computer, everything you see and the whole idea of walking around and everything, that's inside of your consciousness field. And you, when I say the word scenario, I'm referring to something that is similar or in type to the way things are in your consciousness field. But I don't necessarily mean vivid. So to draw a contrast, if your brain tells you, uh, like, I'm stupid, damn it, why did I do that? That's not attached to any scenario, do you see? It's just a phrase. You and your brain communicate well and back and forth when you're operating with scenarios one way or the other, something that has the same basic form as a scenario. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'll back. All right. But I think this might do it for some people. This explanation or kind of leap you ahead. Um, so whenever you have a piece of negative self-talk or anything similar to that, let's suppose that you're either thinking about or in the middle of dealing with a difficult family member, like Megan Lee brought up in her question that she posted about scenarios. And you're going to have like statements that might come into your mind, or you might have feelings um, that aren't very nice if a family member is being difficult. It might be that you're hearing in your head and having like a feeling like, oh, they just should do this. Why don't they see that it's better for them to do this? Um, and just because something might have a little bit of a picture attached to it, like a mental image, that doesn't make it a scenario. When you're thinking in scenarios, you're never stuck. Um, uh, Physically, you're almost never stuck, right? Someone would have to like tie down your legs and arms and so forth, and then mentally, you could always add something conceptually in your mind, think about something, picture something, and so forth. So, but people will get these repetitive thoughts or just a thought that just sort of terminates, like it's like, oh, this person just should do this. Why can't they do this? Why can't they do this? And that's not a scenario. That's just like a statement. Um, a scenario would be if you were to quickly or slowly at a different time think through, okay, so I want this person to get ready on time, and I want them to not be critical of me. Now that isn't yet a scenario. So you're kind of listening to your thought. Maybe your brain is telling you that, and then so far that's not really a scenario quite yet, but you hear that, and then what you want to do is bring it into a scenario. And so if you want them to get ready on time, then um, uh, let's see here. So you might think, and part of bringing things into scenarios is you start to add sort of random details until things start to make sense. So you're thinking how you told a couple friends that you would meet them at a movie and it'll start, or for dinner or whatever. Um, let's say for dinner, and then your family member isn't getting. You're imagining that you're sitting downstairs in the living room, and your family member is still getting ready, and it's 10 minutes past when you thought you should leave. Um, so now you're changing things. Like instead of just having your brain talk to you in a statement, right, and just say, "Ugh, I wish they would just get ready on time," and then you kind of respond from that. Instead, when you start to think in terms of a scenario, you'll almost certainly instantly calm down on top of everything else, because you are now having like a dialogue with your brain in a way that it and you understand. Whenever you're not thinking in in a scenario that is similar in form, and I'll keep illustrating this. I understand I'm repeating myself a little bit, and it's not totally complete yet, but it's similar in form to how things are in your consciousness field. Then again, the helplessness goes away, and really, almost all of your issues are rooted in this helplessness feeling, right? That was your original issue when you were an infant, was your brain concluded you're helpless and it needed to develop relationships and get a model of the world and figure out how to respond to the world to get your needs met. And all sorts of pathways and responses got set up. And then one of the defenses is that your brain keeps you from realizing that, because it concludes that you are fundamentally helpless, and it doesn't want you to part of you not feeling helpless is to not realize that. So it protects you from seeing that. I said that early on in alchemy, and ever since we've been showing a different way. When you communicate with your brain or mind, it doesn't. In my usage, the difference is not relevant. In scenarios, your feeling of helplessness will tend to either go away or be significantly alleviated. You won't be blocked. You might not feel like it might not address the deep down ultimate feeling of helplessness, but the sense of being blocked will stop. I don't really have negative self-talk hardly at all. I haven't for years and years. Apparently, for most people, it's like 2/3 of the time. I'll sometimes have some bad feelings, right? You know me, right? Regarding taxation, regarding a little thing here or there. But I also don't just sit around repeating things. I'm at least looking into it and trying to think about figuring it out. So whenever your brain, you can think of this as if a different person was doing this to you. Suppose that a family member was telling you something like you should do such and such. Like maybe they're telling you that you should be on time to something. Well, that may be true. If you've agreed to meet somebody else, then it may be true. Let me think of one that's pretty obviously not true. If they're telling you that you really shouldn't be striving to make money and focusing on OMG, then and why don't you spend more time with your family? Why do you have to work so hard? Let's say they're saying that. But I'm glad I started with an example of they could be saying something that is correct, right? And you can think it through and think, yeah, I mean, I agreed. Now, if they said you should be on time, but you didn't agree to meet people at a certain time, and it's just kind of in their head, then that's different. But let's take the second thing to a scenario. So if they say you shouldn't work so hard, then you can think, well, where do these shoulds come from? Um, One thing that we know together is that uh, the basic morality comes down to individual property rights. So is there a way, what you can, I'm not suggesting you actually ask them, but what you want to do, I don't really get involved too much with trying to change the minds of especially like my family members or most people in general. Um, of course, with alchemy, I might be, but you understand what I mean. Like on kind of a personal level, I don't. But you can relieve its power over you by either asking them directly or just working through in your mind where it's pretty obvious that they're not going to have an answer, and you think, well, what's the because your own mind is kind of hurting you if they're telling you that why do you work so hard, which kind of carries the implication you should work less, right? Like you're violating some norm or standard. If you're letting that hurt you, maybe feel a little bit guilty or ashamed, then um, then you can deal with that just with your own mind. You don't if you'd be pretty helpless if you had to get them to shut up, right, and stop saying that. So instead of trying to do that, you just think, okay, so tell your if your brain is going to hurt you, right, give you guilt or shame, then have your brain show you in terms of a scenario why it's bad. And so what might that look like is, all right, so tonight you're going to spend, let's say you're going to spend it, you think, all right, I might spend an hour tonight working on ranking a website. And suppose I do that, where will that lead? And then suppose I don't. Suppose I spend an hour with my family, what will, um, where will that lead? What will that lead to? And and that's a question. And then you can add an element in. You can imagine, well, what might we do during that hour? And once again, sort of either way, it'll tend to calm you down because now you're making an alternative use choice. You're picturing it in terms of, again, I'm relating scenarios to your consciousness field. So you're picturing it like, okay, we might go out onto the front lawn and play frisbee, right? That's a scenario, right? You can picture that. You don't have to picture it vividly. You don't have to necessarily picture the color of the frisbee. Although if you're having trouble focusing, sometimes asking questions like what color is the frisbee can just help you kind of focus in more. It's kind of like a trick. Again, I talked about triangulation, right? When you kind of focus in on a few details. And if you notice, even your normal consciousness field, like your sensory field that you walk around in, um, there's only most of the details like slide through your awareness. Like it might seem like you're seeing all kinds of stuff. One second here. Okay, I am back. It might seem like in your normal sensory consciousness field right now when you're looking around that you see all sorts of stuff, but really most of it just kind of flows through and you don't really notice it very distinctly. You almost like might feel like you notice a lot more than you do. So don't get hung up and vivid. If you are thinking about what you might do with your family during that hour that you might be working, and if you think, all right, we might play frisbee, and then how might that feel for people? Where might that lead? Um, and then you could start to ask, well, is there a different time? Is there some other time that I could spend some time with my family? Uh, and then you can realize it can lead to a question. Well, how much time do I want to decide that is a good amount of time to spend with my family each day? And it can also be temporary. You can think, okay, so there's that question, but then maybe you can sort of break free over the next year or two and really do a push and not have it lead further than that. Um, and again, that thought that you can carry that forward where you put some extra time into working, and then you'll look to wind that down, that extra push of working extra within 2 years. That's also what I mean by a scenario, right? Like you're it's not like you vividly see the entire 2 years, or you don't walk through day by day or hour by hour, month by month, and say, what will I do in January? What will I do in February? That sort of thing. But it just sort of relates to what you might think of as real life, but how you feel things in your consciousness field. Um, I and then regarding that one particular hour, and you think through what you might do, you can also then think, all right, if I spend this hour, what might I do, and how might that accumulate? If I spend that extra hour with my family, will I be able to break free when it comes to my monetization in my life? And then you can think, all right, well, I want to get some clients. That'll take me some time, but before I talk to them, I will need to put some time in, and if I don't put time in with this hour that I'm thinking of, and then repeat that most days, then it's not going to get done as I think it through. And notice as I'm doing this, I'm not having repetitive thoughts like, oh gosh, I might not get it done. I don't know if I'm going to get it done. This is overwhelming. That tends to not be scenario based. When I make a statement, I'm talking to you, right? I can't with words. So when I think about spending that hour and then thinking about adding that up each day, for me, it's not like I see a vivid thing, especially when I'm talking, but it relates to this sort of real, tangible life when I imagine that. And then you can add things in, like what will I do? What am I building during that hour? Example website, and that'll be very important because as I do that, I'll be learning and using the tools for search engine optimization. I'll have knowledge and confidence in my method, and I'll know what I'll do for a client when I get one in the future, and so forth. So there's a way that what I just went through, it's again, I more want to show you that it's fairly simple, but that if you're having repetitive thoughts, really it's sort of up to you whether you bring something into a scenario or not. And if you're trying to deal with thoughts where they feel a little bit out of control, or you're worried that they're negative, um, or not very useful, or you're not coming to the right questions for yourselves, like you're thinking but you're not really feel like you're making progress with thinking, then on purpose put a scenario in there. Like when I thought about whether I want to spend an hour working on my work, working on a website building versus an hour playing frisbee with my family, then if I still feel not too sure, then I develop that scenario further. I start to ask questions. What? And you, but by staying in scenarios, you don't just. If you just go fishing for words and thoughts, where uh, if you end up saying something like, oh, "If I don't get started now, when will I ever get started?" Then or I'm not thinking of anything else like that, um, but that's when you want to start to add some details in. So you might ask yourself, well, what website would I work on? What type of website? Example site, money site, one that duplicates a local plumber. And as you start to ask these questions, it again relates to a scenario. If you ask yourself, should I make a local business type website for an example site, then, and especially if you name a potential, like you could say, for example, a plumber. Maybe you won't decide that that's what you're going to do, but that can bring a picture to mind of what that might look like, and then you can imagine that site going up, getting on the web, and you starting to send links to it, and some maybe, I don't know, click and search traffic, and build out things in various ways with that site to rank it. And you can get a sense of also how that might feel for you, whether you tend to feel motivated. If you like, as you work in this scenario, you can get a sense to some degree of whether it's something that you'll want to keep doing. If you're, this is tricky because you can also notice that once you get started, you'll tend to like what you're doing more than when you're just sort of thinking about it in a lot of cases. But you can, like, once you just start working, right, if you sit down and start typing, you'll tend to just get more into what you're doing. So you can take that into account, but you can also, regardless, you can sort of tell in general something that you'll have an easier time enjoying rather than something that you won't. And as you play out the scenario, you can have a sense, right? You can I think that starts to give some explanation. Let me go here to the discussion, back to the Facebook group. I'm a little bit doing discussion right now in a sense. I have the slides, but these questions just came up before the webinar, so I thought it'd be good to sort of talk about scenarios and kind of from my experience. I know I'm sort of searching my mind here and kind of talking to you sort of stream of consciousness for this part. But I'm happy to be doing that. Oh, good. So it's starting to help at least James get some more sense of what I mean. Let's actually, you know what I can do? Let's go straight to the here. Okay, let's go straight to that other slide that I had and see how this goes. All right, if we think of our self-image by kind of default, then, and I'll also try to relate this to scenarios as usual. There's a little bit of a difference. I could be saying the same thing, and the listener and/or myself could be picturing it more in terms of scenarios. I think, but still, certainly, I could say it in a way that makes that easier or harder. All right. So let me think how I picture this. So start by picturing just like your body. All right, yourself as you normally think of yourself, you as a person. And then there's that, a mind in there. And when we think of our self-image, and just by doing that, just by thinking of something like your body and what you picture for yourself, that baselines you a bit into how things like a scenario, like consciousness field, rather than just words and statements. Normally people also, they define their words in terms of other words instead of building something out of scenarios or your consciousness field. And in one sense, well, we need the word scenario, but really what we're trying to do when we're thinking is we're trying to relate things to our consciousness field. And our brain isn't conscious. It has what fires off in our brain is related to what's in our consciousness field, of course, right, to what you experience. But our brain isn't directly aware of it. When we're just hearing words and we're feeling feelings and conclusions from our brain, and we're responding on that level, then we don't really know where it's coming from. It's just kind of coming from a vague, mysterious source. And then we just sort of feel a feeling of confidence or importance in what our brain is saying. And it's until and unless we bring it into like those statements and what we're thinking about into something like what we experience normally, like in our lives, of which I say our consciousness field. And that's essentially going to be a model of the world of some sort, or basically always some sort of model that's based on the world. Like I talked about Middle Earth, right, by Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. Then that whole story, and any story, but I'm just use that one specifically, it doesn't exist somewhere, quote unquote, real, as people normally think of real. But when we watch the movie, for sure, but even when we read the book, we go through a story, and the story what we imagine when we're imagining the story is is like it's scenarios, right? Pretty much whenever you read a book, uh, uh, some things in nonfiction, but especially in fiction, they're describing scenarios. If we were to write down our thoughts normally, it wouldn't look like a story like that typically. It would look like a bunch of repetitive thoughts or conclusions or associations and metaphors. Okay, so if we imagine ourselves as a person, right, and then the way we normally think of ourselves, it was a big breakthrough for me one day, 2 months ago, to realize that we can call it our self-image, but it's kind of nice to, the more tangible we kind of make our idea of ourselves, the better. Um, that really it's composed of trying to meet the sort of shoulds, right, of the people around us, right? We're basically, normally people's self-image is composed of trying to be sort of good enough. Uh, and it's a bit of a blend of how much better than other people we sort of want to be, and then other people's expectations in some sort. Like there's various norms and standards that we're trying to be good enough for, and for some people, good enough is like really, really good. For some, it's like as long as it's kind of decently on par. And so again, I'm talking. Let's put it into a scenario. So the thing about a family member asking us why we work so much would be an example of that's the kind of thing that can go to our self-image. Or let me actually, I had this to read to you, so let me get to this. And I think it can give us a nice backdrop. I'm going to be reading from a book called, I'll put this on the screen, so I attribute it. You Are Not Your Brain is the name of the book. And you might say, oh, wow, they're saying what you're saying, David. But it's also a good case study, and no, they're not. They say you're not your brain, instead you're like your mind or your true self or something like that. And I say that you're neither of those. However, it's still an interesting book. I'm going to take like a 1 minute break, and then I will come right back. We'll have some abrupt breaks once in a while here, perhaps. All right. And one note I wanted to make is I want to make sure it doesn't get lost. Whenever your brain is giving you negative or repetitive or any kind of, or even if you're trying to thoughts, or even if you're trying to think about something and it's not quite happening, then you call it down by asking you a scenario, like kind of like when they say like it's snap it or it didn't happen, or make a video or a picture of it or it didn't happen, right? Like in a video game or in real life. Um, you're it's like you could tell your brain, uh, show me that what you're saying is true by relating it to a scenario rather than including how I'm going to be better off, how it relates to my objectives that are the main objective that we have. We we meaning you and your brain. Uh, it has to relate to an objective. It has to show how you're better off, and so forth. So if your brain is saying, "Oh gosh, this is so annoying. This is so annoying. This is so difficult," then say, "All right, show me the money. Right? Show me the um, how even thinking that is going to help me accomplish my objective? What about that statement is going to be helpful? Okay, all right, I was going to read here. This is a pretty cool little story that'll help to, I don't know if a story, but okay. So Sarah, the bright young public relations specialist, came to us in a very frustrated state and launched into a story about an interaction she had with her boss that she could not get out of her head. They had been working on an important press release, and Sarah had done everything right. Her boss had told her the release looked amazing and that she had done a great job. He assured her that the client would be quite happy, and then mentioned that next time she should try to get the job done earlier, so that they did not have to scramble at the last minute to get everything done. Devastated by his one corrective comment, Sarah felt deflated, like all the energy had drained from her body. And she could not hold the positive comments he made about her efforts in her mind. She had worked very hard and even stayed late the day before to make sure everything was done perfectly. Although she did not say anything to him, her boss, she knew the reason they were running around at the 11th hour was that her boss kept making changes up to the very last minute. It wasn't her fault the press release was going out so late. It was his inability to be clear about what he wanted in the first place that caused the delay. Okay, so you have this situation where Sarah is working on this press release. She gets it done. The boss praises the press release and then says, let's get it done faster next time. And then she really goes to pieces, very deflated, and so forth. So when we understand standards and norms, then we see that Sarah has these two different goals going on. One, and I'm just using goal in the kind of the general sense. One is to just do her work, make money, achieve the press release, that sort of thing, right? Like task-oriented goals, objectives. But then separately, she needs to deal with upkeeping her self-image. And this is the kind of thing I was talking about last time, is even if we don't have something hit us quite as hard as what hit Sarah in this example, then I see this is nonstop, where people are trying to achieve their objectives and they're trying to meet various norms and standards and keep a sense of their self-image, and they think that that self-image is like this precious resource, which is, again, different than a public image or reputation. Your reputation in terms of how people trust you and have confidence in you, that may well be a resource. But remember, we want to watch out for that we need to have resources or we're helpless fundamentally, right? That's why we're going to get to where we want to think totally differently in terms of base our self-image on method, which will then leave us never helpless. And also having a baseline of who we are in terms of the being that's aware of our consciousness field. And we could probably come up with scenario after scenario where on the one hand people are trying to do tasks, and you could see this probably in yourself, you could think back, you could think about other people you're working with. Wouldn't it be great, isn't it great, when you work with people that are quite task oriented and they're not obviously have a whole bunch of landmines with their self-image, where it's like, it's fairly obvious with some people where it's just so important to them. It's almost like they're doing their job in order to reinforce or upkeep a self-image rather than to stack objectives and building blocks to get somewhere. I want to go on though with the Sarah story because it's also eye-opening in a number of ways. It can kind of help us see where this comes from. Now, ultimately we don't want a situation where we need to figure out where these incorrect or difficult thoughts or self-image thoughts come from in order to live our lives. We'd like to bypass all that, where we don't have to figure out what our brother said to us when we were 6 just to move on with our lives or to achieve our objectives, right? We'd like to kind of just build something that would ignore all that. But I think it's eye-opening to get a sense of where this came from in Sarah's case. Despite so the last paragraph ended. It was her boss's inability to be clear about what he wanted in the first place, causing the delay. Despite knowing this, Sarah kept doubting herself, running the events of the day through her head and wondering what she could have done differently. Now, this is a good sentence about Sarah running the events of her day through her head and wondering what she could have done differently, because it shows how it's like she could think that she's thinking in scenarios, but it's not helping her. But this is more like a repetitive thought. Um, Let me think here. Well, it's almost like she's given up the ball game to start with, right? Like once your goal is to upkeep your self-image, where you're trying to be good enough, right, compared to these norms and standards, like she's doing, then you're basically screwed. Like even if she's thinking in scenarios correctly, when none of the options work, I think my next webinar I'm going to get to some more specifics about how to get to like what's true and how to think in a certain way that, or in several whatever related ways that can further help here. But one of the thing to keep in mind is that if you're playing scenarios and you just can't find a way to win, and this can happen, then you need to change the game, right? You need to find something deeper that's wrong. There's some premise that's wrong. So this comes up with like in-laws or any kind of family members or parents or whoever, especially if they're living with you, or kids or whoever. Hopefully not a spouse, but it could be spouse. Where whatever you say, there doesn't seem to be a way to make it work, right? Or certainly when you're dating, right? You probably all run into where we have friends and they're dating someone, and it's like nothing that they do works, right? They're just trying and trying to make it work with the other person or please the other person or deal with the other person's issues and neuroses or whatever, or just plainly the fact that the other person, even though they don't realize it, just isn't that interested in them or that interested in the relationship or something. And so it doesn't matter what you say, right? Or it could be a potential client if you're sitting there, or maybe you're going to go to a networking meeting. And how nice is it to imagine going to a networking meeting just to kind of go there without, just to kind of get a sense of things, just to go and enjoy yourself. It's kind of an example of alchemy, like a cluster that was asked about, where if you're going to a networking meeting, people can cluster their goals, where it's like they have to go get a sense of things, plus they want various outcomes with various people. They want to get some, I don't know, phone numbers or business cards or make some contacts. That's well and good if that's cool for you, but if it's difficult at all, then how about just decoupling things, breaking apart the cluster and just showing up and getting a sense of things. I often, when I communicate with people, could be potential someone that I work with or whoever, I'll often just talk to them, right? Like without really an objective in mind, and it'll help me to kind of get a sense of things. I'm not even trying to judge them or not. I'm just I don't know, talking. It just kind of gives you a sense or a foothold. Let's see here. So what Sarah should have realized as she kept going through her head and trying to see what she did differently is that she's doing something where she can't win, right? She has to change the game. And then I'll continue. She blamed herself and felt horrible about her work. And one of the reasons I'm reading this to you is that as we try to build a self-image that's going to be helpful for us and not so costly and not so where it's coming up constantly as a separate goal that's going to interfere with our main objectives, then keeping Sarah in mind can just kind of vividly give us kind of a vivid, some vivid thoughts and such. So she blamed herself and felt horrible about her work. Rather than giving herself credit for what she did right and accepting that unpredictability can throw a wrench in the best laid plans, she berated herself and said sadly, I feel like a loser yet again. When she finished, we asked Sarah why she didn't thank her boss for the advice and realized that the reason the project was late because of him. So again, the action she could have took, I suppose they're suggesting. I would have suggested something maybe a bit different. Uh, but just thank her boss for the advice and realize, and in her head realize the reason for the project was late was because of him. By the way, if you're the boss, this another reason why this is a very useful, and this is a scenario, right? This whole thing here. Um, the reason why this is a useful scenario is, sorry, when I say it's a scenario, it probably is. It almost certainly these words will bring forth a scenario for you. But if someone was kind of zoning out and they didn't translate this to kind of something that they could feel and see in their head, it doesn't have to be vivid. Notice that in this, we're not vividly picturing Sarah. We couldn't even say what color her hair was or how tall she is or what she looks like at all. You see that? And that's fine, right? We can understand just fine without that. So it can give us more insight in scenarios. But this also helps us from the standpoint of the boss, right? If we're working with someone and we say something like that, like, oh, let's not be late next time, uh, it can really mess with somebody. Now, Sarah's maybe a bit of an extreme case, but a lot of people would feel bothered by that. And it's a real silly thing for a boss to say just if you think about it, it would make a lot more sense to just wait till there was a time when it was going to be necessary to do things on time again and just say something collaborative um, like let me uh, let me help support you better this time so we can get this done without scrambling at the last minute, or um, let's see if we can get this done earlier, or not even earlier, not even compare. I wouldn't even want to compare it to the previous one. I would just pick a thing. I would say, all right, they want it by the 20th. These clients, let's see if we can get it all prepared by the 18th, and let me make sure I help support you with doing that, right? So that would have been a much smarter way for her boss to handle it. Okay, so these psychiatrists, they asked Sarah why she didn't thank her boss for the advice and realized the reason the project was late was because of him. In other words, why did she take this comment so personally? She seemed startled by this question, almost as if it was coming from left field. But he's my boss, she replied. I have to do whatever he asks in the way he asks for it. In fact, on the way over here, I realized I should have been able to figure out what he wanted, or that I should have picked up on the clues better. Maybe I just wasn't paying attention well enough. Maybe he did tell me what he wanted and I just missed it. Either way, I was the problem. It must be my fault. Now, of course, that's a little bit extreme by Sarah there, but it's not crazy to try to figure out one of the first things, one thing you could do is just try to not be the problem. Meaning you can think about what you could do differently, but if you're focused on method rather than this like image of you as a person that has to meet these standards and norms already, that you have to prove you're already good enough and smart enough and so forth, then it's very easy to just think like in terms of method, right? Like you can constructively ask, what could I do differently, but just to achieve the objective even better, including the objective of enhancing your reputation with your boss and so forth. When we pointed out to Sarah, I want to get to the point where she also realized where this came from, because that's pretty interesting. It just gives us one illustration of anything that helps us to see our thoughts as more arbitrary, as baseless, the better. And this example will help give one example of that. When we pointed out to Sarah that her belief that she needed to be perfect was a deceptive brain message, and that she was minimizing her abilities and contributions by wholeheartedly buying into this version of events, she became visibly upset. She said in all seriousness, I know what my brain is doing, but what I really want to know is why do I overanalyze and overthink every interaction I have? Why can't I just drop it and move on with my life? And once again, I think that when we focus on method rather than this idea of standards and norms, and we can dissolve each standard and norm by running it through the scenario. So this idea that you have to be perfect or else you can't feel happy and people won't want to work with you, if you just start to apply that to a scenario, she could think her own job is, or you could reverse it and think about someone you're working with. You'd want them to want to be doing a good job in terms of their objectives, right? If you're working with somebody, and so like so that's helpful. Um, but you wouldn't want them to go to pieces if something's not done perfectly. And mostly you'd want someone that you're working with to be future oriented and again method oriented, where if something doesn't go as well as people might hope, they take a look at the methods that are being used and try to have insights there. And they're looking to have the methods better so the future can have better results. And that's it, nothing else. um, let's see here. So the solution that I want us to get to is to the useful thing about this book, You Are Not Your Brain, is it gives people a model, even if the model is fundamentally incorrect, by identifying with their mind instead of their brain. But anything that gives people a distinction where some of their brain messages, right, some of their thoughts are looked at as not coming from them and they're coming from some source that isn't needed to be trusted so strongly, or like gospel or whatever. Um, so you can see how that helps people. We we're going to get the same result, but with a more even more correct understanding of who you are as a being with a mind, with a consciousness field, and with a mind. Uh, and notice that even when I say the world of reasons, where I say the physical world exists in the world of reasons, your mind exists there. It's the reasons for why your consciousness field is the way that it is, rather than the way some other way. I'm building the whole idea of the world of reasons off of my consciousness field. You see, so I could even amend what I say about scenarios, where it isn't like you have to always be immersed in a scenario in your mind, but you start based in your consciousness field or something like your consciousness field, like a tangible, something that's kind of tangible and model. But it's not like tangible out there. It's tangible in your consciousness field. You picture a website, like as you would see it in your consciousness field if you're imagining it. And then you think what you would want to do with it, right? You can think in words sometimes, and where the scenario is you're a little bit uh, you're not straying too far from the baseline or the scenario, or like the way something would be in your consciousness field. But if your words are built, constructed off of something tangible, then you can think in words for a little bit and you should be fine. So it's not so much that you want to have an obsession with, am I thinking in scenarios or not? Instead, what you want to do is think about foundations, like we talked about early on. And like if someone says faith is what the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things to come, then that doesn't bring to mind anything that's like tangible or in the consciousness field. So we want to start and think, all right, so I'm on an island, let's say, I'm stranded on an island, and I can't see any other island or whatever, and so I hope that I'm able to get off the island, and so I start to build a raft or a boat or something like that with faith. Um, and you might start to try to think about faith like that. You could use any number of zillions of other examples, but you start with something that you can you could say you can picture it, but the point is that it's like, again, like real life. And we can have a different sense, us as alchemists can have a different sense of real life. Real life is your consciousness field, and then there's reasons for it. Real life isn't some world out there that's hard and green or blue or tangible that exists outside of your consciousness field. The only things that exist outside of your consciousness field are other people's consciousness fields and reasons for why your consciousness field is the way it is, and beings that are aware. So it really bring things back, or baseline things in something, again, like tangible. That sounds similar to stuff that other people might talk about with make it tangible, But when we're trying to have our thoughts be tangible, but if we're confused about who we are, um, oh, like, okay, so if we're this topic that we're on right now, if we're dealing with who we are and how we want our self-image to be, then um, if we didn't base things in our conscious field and scenarios that way, then people think of themselves as like a person who's like in the physical world and that has a mind. That's tangible, but it's not a scenario based on your conscious field. Instead, thinking about who you are, you start by baselining yourself and you're stopping and thinking about your conscious field for a moment, just everything you're aware of, including your internal thoughts and feelings. And then say, okay, I'm the being that's aware of that, period. And then when we think of a self-image or a self, then we think, all right, there's a mind that I'm attached to, and that's attached to a body, we could say, and that body is in the world of reasons, and that mind is in the world of reasons, but it's real, but it really exists in the world of reasons. And then I have a sort of ideal image of how I want myself to operate, how I want my mind to operate, and then what might that be? You see, so that's how I would do things. And starting that way is very powerful. And then we can explore that. And when I say explore it using scenarios, again, I'm saying baseline things in starting with your consciousness field. Like your mind is based in your consciousness field in the sense that you build the idea of your mind as that which is responsible for your thoughts that you're aware of, right? And responsible for moving your body around, and that helps you think and so forth. Um, so I wrote here on. I'll continue with this when I'm reading this in a moment. Um, so when I said let's create an ideal, not idealized self together, an idealized self, like Superman or Superwoman or something like that, where you're exceeding norms and standards, you're doing all sorts of amazing things. Uh, that then you're just playing in the same wrong ball game of having yourself be based on these norms and standards that ultimately are from people outside of yourself. And even if you try to come up with your own, it's still it's still if you're trying to think, well, what do I want to be? How good do I want to be at making money and whatever else? You're still starting in the wrong place, where it'll end up just kind of your mind's going to give you a sort of average, or you're starting with other people's standards and norms, right? That got stuck in your mind from the beginning. How a person acts, like a mind is basically pushed and pulled by the standards and norms of the people around them. And that makes it easy to have a sense of how people are going to act. But minds have uh, their own objectives and goals and previous standards and norms from that got stuck from a young age. So there's that, what's already in someone's mind, plus the pressures of the people around them. When we think of an ideal self, how about when I imagine going after objectives, then I imagine staying focused on objectives, right? And not worrying about whether I'm doing a good enough job going after the objective or whether I've been smart enough and all that. And you can think either you can come up with scenarios from the past where that's been an issue for you, or you can just make something up where you imagine somebody either maybe being critical of you, or if you just imagine that you're trying to rank a website and think, am I doing this in order to prove to myself that I'm good enough, or do I just want the result? And an ideal self, I think, is based on this method, this objective-oriented method, where you're not doing things in order to prove to yourself that you can do them, or to prove to other people that you can do them. And the distinction that people normally have is like, oh, well, that people think that it's enlightened, sort of if you're kind of self-motivated rather than just trying to please the people around you, right, and live up to other people's standards. Um, but you don't just want to be it's not even about being self-motivated or motivated to be good enough according to your own norms and standards rather than other people's. I would say you want to get rid of all of that and not think that way. If I if I pick an objective that I want to reach in life that is going to stack, that's going to give me a building block, or it's going to help if I want to come up with a good offer, and then if I want to come up with a good sales process for that offer, then I just want to do that, right? I don't want to also be trying to prove that I'm smart by doing it fast or doing it well the first time or whatever it might be. Isn't that pretty clearly going to make things harder, right? And so as we start to look at that, then we realize that, and we think, what norms and standards do I want to have? But I think that we just don't want to have these norms and standards. Instead, we want to just have this idea of, as I say, like method. Like, what are the methods? Like, what if we think of ourselves as basically being composed of a better method? And methods are also based on your mental models for the world. So developing, you're someone who's developing better methods or discovering the kind of fundamental methods that are universally correct. Things like curiosity or appreciation. You can respond to everything with that. So part of your self-image could be that you respond to things with curiosity or appreciation. And that's method-based, right? It's not norm or standard-based. It's not that you do a good job on stuff, right? Or that you keep up with the people around you or something like that. Now, once we have an idea of ourself that is going to leave us where we don't need to feel helpless because it's based on method, like I showed there, then we can think, well, what public image do I want? And that is going to maybe need to take into account the norms and standards and desires of other people. But then you're doing that strategically, right? You're doing that because it's going to help others or help yourself achieve objectives if people trust you or if they have confidence in you and so forth. When Cotton has a daily report sent to his clients with like Site Auditor Pro, right, or whatever, then that is part of the public image he's projecting, right? A reporting consistently, competence, and so forth. So you can think strategically, and that does matter. But when other people, but again, it's objective based. It's not like goal, like a stacking proper goal based. We're doing it in order to achieve a result, not in order to feel good about ourselves, our public image. And it's nothing need to be fake about it. It's nothing fake about sending out reports or about keeping your word, right? So I'm not talking about projecting a fake image or not. It's harder, if it's fake, it's hard to keep your story straight, right? But your public image is going to be based on what your body ends up doing, right? It's going to be based on your thoughts and so forth. If you get your methods straight, and which includes having accurate models of the world, then your public image is going to be pretty great. You can also think in terms, like I talked about earlier, you can think in terms of, well, how would the ideal partner act, and like spouse or business partner, and get over the idea of them just doing whatever you want, right? If it's anything like, if the ideal partner just does what I want, always wants to achieve the same goals that I want and that sort of thing, that can't be it, right? So you don't, if the ideal partner, romantic or business or whatever, is someone that meets your norms and standards all the time, every day, then that's going to blow back on you, right? That's right. Like how you view an ideal partner is going to have to, like by the law of implication, right? It's going to have to be how you think of yourself. So if you want other people to do what you want, then you're going to believe that you need to do what other people want. In other words, meet their norms and standards and do what they think you should do. And you might not even affirm it like intellectually, but you'll just feel it. This self-image is just something that you feel, you're hardly aware of, right? When I read from what Sarah was going through here in this book, she didn't think about things in the way that I'm talking about. She just felt it, right? She just felt like she had to uphold certain norms and standards and perfection and so forth. And she would just feel very perturbed and agitated, and like something was really wrong, and like there's like a place in your brain that fires off, which it just makes you feel like emotionally upset, like a feeling of oh no, and panic and unease and so forth. So you're going to want to develop, you're going to want to realize that the ideal partner is also somebody that's following a particular method, and you want to think about what that method might be. It's going to be the same as one that's going to make sense for you. Do you see? So even your self-image can be based on, even your public image can be based on method. And notice how I do this, right? If you were to keep this thought in your mind and go back and listen to me or listen to me in the future, I don't really probably come across like I'm trying to prove that I'm smart to you, like that it matters to me, like that I'm in the middle of trying to achieve that goal while I'm talking. And so why? Because my public image is something based on, I'd like people to think of me more in terms of methods that I follow. And then also if I screw up, I can identify the screw up in terms of a method rather than it just being like stuck in like that I'm in people's minds like I'm not good enough or that I'm not reliable or something. If I can explain in terms of how my method could have been better or can be better in the future, or how I'll look for a better method in the future, that's pretty ideal, right? If you're working with someone else and that's how they respond to not meeting an objective, is trying to take a look at the methods and get it better. And they might not know right away, especially if they're patient with that. Like if they're kind of focused with it, but also patient, where it's not like in a rush. When people are in a rush, of course there's some real life rushes, like real life deadlines that you might have to hit for other people. But most of why people try to do things fast just has to do with that they feel like a good and smart person would achieve a certain income in a certain amount of time, right? Or would get someone to marry them in a certain amount of time, right? That sort of thing. Or would sleep with them a certain number of times per week, or a day or whatever. So you see now how it comes down to, I know I'm repeating myself, but just to wrap up here, we want a self-image based on method, and even a public image based on method, and no longer about norms and standards. And some other quick examples of norms and standards is like fairness. And then I could show you a scenario with like fairness. Suppose interestingly enough, Jesus spoke in parables, right, which are scenarios. And this is not regardless of what current religion you have, this will be a relevant example of fairness. So Jesus made it clear with at least one parable, probably really several, that fairness was not interesting to Jesus. And he said, suppose there's a vineyard and there's workers that are hired. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but there's workers that are hired in the morning and they come and work in the vineyard. And then the master of the vineyard sees that he wants to have some more workers, so he goes out in the late morning and he hires some more. And then he goes out in the afternoon and hires some more. And then he goes out in the evening and hires some more. And the original workers he promised like 1 talent, right, or $100 or whatever. And then so he gives them the $100, but then he also gives $100 to even the people that join the work very late. And then he said, well, people could come that were working all day and complain and say, hey, that's not fair. And he would say, didn't I give you the wage that I promised you? If I want to give that same wage to people that started working later, then I can do that. And so that's a scenario that shows that Jesus was not interested in fairness. We can think through other scenarios with fairness. You're on an island, or you're in a town. Let's just say you're in a town with whether money exists, but maybe it's like a frontier town in the 1800s, um, or sorry, in the 1700s in America, and there's money, but there's like 100 people in the town, and someone invents something really useful, maybe some extra good horseshoes, or they're the only one that can do horseshoes of a certain type, uh, and uh, and they invent that, and that makes them, and they work night and day making them for people, and then they have more money. Is that unfair? Is that a problem? What if you want a task done? What if you're partnering with people and you're maybe they go out and they get clients for you, and you do the SEO for them, for your team, the team of you and one other person. And suppose they're really good at sales, and they accomplish their objective really quickly and easily, and they get you clients quickly and easily. It only takes them a few minutes. All right. And then you spend, let's say it takes you a long time to do SEO. And in real life, this could be reversed. It could take pretty quick to do SEO and harder to get clients, but longer to get clients. But let's just say it was that way. Then aren't you getting what you want, right? Like does the other, I stressed early and often with our team, with Greg, Mike, and myself, the idea that we're all way ahead, we're way over 100% value with each other of what we sort of promised, like early on with OMG 4 years ago. Because this whole idea of people trying to, right, they revert to, they always talk about how hard they work, and oh, I did this, right? We have to always be, not with Mike and Greg, but just by default, what'll happen is when people are a member of a team, they're always trying to let the other team members know how much work they're doing. And some people will be like keeping an eye on other people to make sure they're doing enough work. And is it fair? Um, do you want fairness to be part of your norms and standards in life? Should that be a standard that you're trying to uphold? For a lot of people, it is in most cases, unless it's like really obvious why it's okay for something not to be fair. Then they kind of default down to where they want to see fairness. But what good does fairness do? If I want to team up with people and they're going to do something very important, even if they do it quick and easy, and it takes me a lot longer to do the part that I'm doing, what does that matter? I'm still getting what I want. Or what if I have to do 3/4 of the work in order to make a project work, but the other person is still doing what they said they were going to do? Should I complain? Should I keep working with the person? Well, I mean, if I want that objective again, if I want to keep going, if there's someone clearly even better somehow, and there's some reason why it makes sense to skip over the other person. I tend to try to, the trouble with skipping from person to person is it undermines loyalty, right? The longer you stay with people, specific people, the more there's just an underlying benefit to that. But there you go. And notice I, again, spoke in terms of scenarios, in terms of just kind of baselining what I'm saying in terms of real life, so to speak, instead of just statements. A statement would be like, well, obviously things need to be fair. Do you see? Like, there's no scenario there. Just, well, obviously things have to be fair. Like, or income inequality is a rising problem. And there could be statistics, or there could even be a little bit of thing that looks like it relates to real life, like the wage, the richest people make more than I don't know, the gap is bigger in some way. But if it's not carried forward to why it matters, right? If you're saying something matters, like if it's bad, and it should be fixed, then need to carry forth the scenario so it forwards and backwards. And I'll get more into that next session. We'll take a look at how to investigate questions and know what's true better with some specific methods there that I haven't really gotten to yet. I think I referred to it briefly in a slide, but I can go into that much more specifically, and it'll further clear things up for you. Okay, wrapping up here, let me finish the story with Sarah, just because it's kind of interesting where it came from. One second. Let's see here. I'll just read, just pick up in a certain place here. We tell people that this is the author speaking, we tell people that most deceptive brain messages arise from our incredible ability to absorb information. how we learn and adapt in healthy and unhealthy ways, especially in childhood. To Sarah, this intuitively made sense, but she still couldn't help wondering where some of her most entrenched deceptive brain messages came from. She knew she often felt like a loser, especially when her boss corrected her, but believed she had a good childhood and that her parents were great. No one yelled at me or beat me. They were around. We lived a comfortable life. What is there to complain about, she asked. She had a good group of friends and did not remember having problems at school. She was active and engaged in life as a child, so, quote, there was no reason I should think like this, she said. When we encouraged Sarah to pay attention to the negative comments in her head and put a name, voice, or face to them when they arose, a surprising thing happened. She started to remember an incident with her older brother when she was 6 years old. It was a hot summer day, and the family had gone out to get ice cream. Sarah loved mint chocolate chip and a sugar cone and could not wait to have one. It was always a special treat. Once everyone had their ice cream, the family sat at a picnic bench and dug in. Unfortunately, Sarah dropped her cone on the ground by accident. She immediately became embarrassed when her brother started laughing at and mocking her. He loudly announced what she had done and told her she was a useless, pathetic loser. Not helping matters, her mother responded by telling Sarah that the consequences of not paying attention was that she would have to go without any ice cream that night. Perhaps, her mother mused out loud, this would be a lesson to Sarah that she needs to be more careful. Otherwise, she will miss out on things in life, and people will not trust her to be responsible or worthy of important tasks. Fascinating, right? And also fascinating again how focusing on method, I most certainly, I mean, it's easy to say after reading this, but if that happened to my son, I would just get him a new ice cream. But then, and I might not give him any lecture at all. I would just show them that it's okay if you make a mistake. But then next time that we're getting an ice cream, I would say, remember to be careful. It doesn't make any sense to, after they spill something, say, be careful, right? It's kind of obnoxious. So I just don't say anything. But then again, the next time you can work on method at the right times. And you say, be careful and gentle with this, because if you spill it, then we have to go back and get a new one or whatever. But fascinating how something like that, and then it gets in someone's mind, and then they get the sense that they have to be perfect, or else they'll miss out on important things. They have to pay attention to everything, and then their brain gives them messages, and it can just be debilitating. We might not have it that extreme, but basically we could see where our thoughts come from, and so we want to rebuild in a foundational way as we're doing. Even this idea of fairness that I talked about. Justice is the same way. Justice is a real big one, that we really feel like justice is important. But if you walk through what it probably want me to do that now that I started to mention. So first of all, with justice, it involves doubling down, doubling all the bad in the world, right? Whenever someone does something bad, then we basically whack them back harder, right? So we have to double all the bad. If we think, what we can do is think in terms of, and again, to make this tangible, you come up with any number of a zillion examples where you feel like somebody wrongs you. So part of my issue is that my examples that first come to mind are from people I don't mean injustice with people I work with, but I work with people, right, in OMG, and I have a wife, a mother. All these are real people that can listen to my recordings. So I have to come up with kind of hypotheticals. But the first, tangible things can come to mind first. But let's see here. Oh, well, certainly in romantic relationships, people run into this constantly, where, boy, the idea of justice just ruins romantic relationships, where someone will feel slighted by somebody else. And it might not even be real. They might just perceive something as an attack, which means they're like looking for it somehow, right? Looking to see if they're attacked, which is no good right there, right? As part of someone's self-image, is in there as a norm and standard is like looking out for attacks and trying to see them and catch them early. Sometimes people will talk about how they feel like they're being attacked by somebody, and I'll look at it, and it could be interpreted different ways. It may well be a bit of an attack, and even the attack itself would be like being critical of an idea or strategy. Uh, so, uh, so you don't have to worry in that case. If you don't have a self-image based on that you're already good enough and smart enough, then you that can't be attacked. So that's much better. But then let's just say someone doesn't do what you hope they would do, right? They don't go out on a date with you, they don't sleep with you a certain night or something, and then you want justice, you want to get them back, or it'll feel like, oh, I want to them to know how I feel. I want them to experience it too, so I know how they feel. Um, but if you're in a relationship with someone that cares about you, then you can just tell them about how you experience it, and not in order to say like when you did. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here. Uh, but if you, just as an indication, if someone doesn't sleep with you when you feel like they should, then you could say, I don't think that I'm right about this. I'm just letting you know how I experienced that situation, and then you can explain it. When you didn't want to sleep with me, I felt like there was nothing I could do, or like that it wasn't important to you, or I wasn't sure what I could do in the future, and am I going to run into this more often? And you just kind of explain it non-judgmentally, just sharing it. Again, this is relating to your experience, your consciousness field. You don't have to use the words consciousness field. The other person doesn't have to know anything about alchemy. But if you explain how something was to you in terms of from your eyes, like in your experience, and it's possible to do it in a way that isn't making judgments, this isn't always going to be received well by people, but overall it tends to be necessary. And we can't, if other people are going to be touchy about everything, that could be a tough thing. And really, in a romantic relationship, if someone cares about you, then to care about someone means to care about how they experience things. And so if you relate how you experience something in a non-judgmental way, admitting that it's not like this is right, you're just letting them know how you experienced it so you can talk about it. And also, if you don't do that only, I mean, you want to have fun with the person, not just have every interaction be like, oh, I experienced this, I experienced that. But if once in a while you do that, if they don't care, then you shouldn't really be in a romantic relationship with that person. It should be pretty interesting for them to get a sense of how you experience something. That gives them much more insight into how things are for you. And then they can interact with you better and make you happier and so forth. So when it comes to like someone attacking your property and taking your property, you might need to stop them. And you can work through a scenario. Your neighbor walks up to you with a gun and says, give me $1,000, right? What do you do about that? Well, it's still not about justice. It's more about you want that to stop. You want it to get reversed, ideally, if you're able. It's going to cost, but it's going to cost some amount of resources to reverse it. I think one thing that helps me tremendously is thinking in terms of quarantining. Like, is the damage limited? And then I could see what I can do about reversing the damage. But simply doubling all the bad out there isn't, in and of itself, what we want. We might need to project an image, like if you attack me, that could have bad consequences for you. I'm not talking to you guys, but just out there. But I mean, and even then, for the most of the people that we're dealing with in business and personal, are these really people that are going to just take our property unless they're scared that we're going to like smash them back, right? Like generally, and practically speaking in life, you don't need to worry about justice in your social life or your romantic life or your business life for the most part, because why are you working with people that, like, you don't work closely with people that are just going to mess with your property, right? You just stop working with them. And then people that you're working with should care on some level, at least about the objective, and care enough just, not to do things that are unjust to you. And then you could just explain how you feel, so it's, or not how you feel, not a judgment, but how you experience it. And if they don't care, then you learn something, right? And you probably don't want to be that close to the person. Now, if they're not that close to you, if they're not like in a close business or joint venture, then like the Like I wouldn't want to have as the player coaches, the principals, stakeholders in OMG. I would want each of them to just not be doing things that were pretty clearly unjust to me. Unfair is different. I don't think in terms of fairness or whatever. But but if it was like an affiliate, then I just think I don't really worry about it. If they're like just someone promoting us or something, I just think I just kind of think of the total result. And even with someone closer, sometimes you just think of the total result. Do I still want that total interaction with the person, including the injustice or not? And if you want it, great. If you don't want it, then you don't want it. Is the potential damage quarantined? But justice for the sake of justice is not going to be part of. Again, it's you're going to want to drop that norm and standard, and you can work through um, other potential scenarios perhaps yourself. And I'll keep thinking about how to show you what it means to walk through a scenario more and more. Okay, wonderful. We are good. We can discuss for a few minutes. Probably not too long, and then we'll go from there. Mitch writes, does this suggest that it would be more adaptive and correct to not identify with any norms and standards, or just don't identify with norms and standards that are arbitrary? Yeah, um, that's a good question that I want to think about that some more. You know, what you don't want to do is identify with things that aren't foundational. If a norm or standard is arbitrary, and like you just said, right, um, then you still might meet it for the sake of other people, right? So even if something's a ridiculous expectation of somebody else, if you're going to be interacting with that person in the first place, then you might still try to deal with it, like have your meet it. But it's not something you feel guilty or ashamed about. Um, I don't know. I don't know if there's any norms and standards, or if we don't want to think in terms of that at all. Off the top of my head at the moment, it's a perfect question. It's a in now that you say it, it's a fairly obvious question in a good way. I mean, uh, but I'll see if more things come to mind regarding that. But mostly, as a little bit repetitive, but I really think in terms of method rather than what's normal. What's my I don't think what's my expectation. Right? People think, oh, what do I expect regarding this? And they have to ask that because it all relates to or doing something in order to upkeep their self-image. When they ask, well, what's the result that I expect, and how long should it be to expect it? If you're purely asking that from a resource management standpoint, then okay. But mostly we want to think in terms of objective that stacks or breakthrough or breaking through bottlenecks, and then methods for doing so. Dressing in a suit and tie to meet a client could be strategic for the objective of appealing to their norms and beliefs of a sharp-dressed businessman. Absolutely. But counterproductive if the client compliments you and you infer from this that it will make it easier to convert. Oh, one sec. I think it's fine if they compliment you and you suppose that it will be easier to convert them. I don't know that that would be counterproductive. I need to, as I talk about methods of thinking, I'll try to be more clear about inference and deduction and so forth as well. And thank you, Mike, who wrote incredible as always. That's great, Dave. Let me think here. So you definitely do want to dress well when it could be relevant. Um, I don't really personally get myself in situations where it's that important. Although even for these webinars, I mean, it might not look like I try to dress well, but I try to dress like particularly, ridiculously or sloppily. I don't wear like I don't know, some sort of tank top or something like that. Um, but um, but yeah, I definitely. Uh, Pretty much if they compliment you, then I would remember that, and I would make sure to dress that way in the future to the degree that I wanted to make things easier with that person. uh, so I wouldn't say that it was counterproductive if you dress a certain way in order to be complimented to feel better about yourself, then that can be an issue, and you might end up spending way too much on clothes and just spending a lot of resources in order to like feel like you're dressed well. Um, but if you're doing it in order to get a result with other people, then you're on track. You're welcome, Mitch. And Mitch wrote, "Thank you, David. It's very helpful watching you walk through your process and explain the correct method and practice." Yeah, thank you. I kind of knew this webinar would be a little bit of a kind of thinking out loud to a good degree, and that has benefits and drawbacks. But there's a way that having that happen from time to time might happen fairly often, but is important, and it kind of removes the intimidation, gives you more of a sense into how I experience things and how I do things and so forth. And I was also thinking over the last couple of days, a little bit like a personal trainer. Well, I did this even. I'm not that motivated to make money for whatever reason myself. Which isn't necessarily helpful at all. But by teaming up with Mike, who's differently motivated to make money, you kind of like ride on their energy for that particular thing. Same thing with Mike likes to use a personal trainer because then he can kind of ride on their psychic energy, so to speak. I'm just being simple and metaphorical when I say psychic energy, but their meme or their energy for their and even their norm and standard about I don't know if that uh, yeah, I mean if you there probably is a way that we want to take advantage of norms and standards, certainly like vectors as well, um, where if we're trying to achieve a certain result, then having people around us that are motivated to achieve that result. Like sometimes we want a result, but we're weirdly not even that motivated to do some or all of. But anyway, it's easy to see with a personal trainer, uh, where they can help you exercise just by kind of to them they feel normal and energetic and motivated to work out or to help you work out. And I might do the same thing for you with thinking in this way, right? Of where I will make it feel more normal. There's a way that I think we could take advantage of how our mind motivates us, norms and standards, and kind of get the ones in there that we want. So I do think we want to take advantage of them. It's something that I'll look to get a little bit more clear if I can, and you can think about it as well. But even in the absence of perfect clarity on that, uh, certainly if you want to make more money being around people with where that's more normal and where they're motivated to do so, you'll feel that. And if you work with people that really want to make money, then it'll make it easier for you. It's kind of how I did things. And then I'm going to tend to make it a lot easier for you to think through these concepts, these important concepts, in this kind of correct way, right? Because I have a lot of motivation, energy to do that, and probably much more than normal or whatever, but a lot like a personal trainer who's into exercise or whatever. So and there's our brain is plastic in the sense that it's changeable, but it's not. It still starts somewhere. It still takes like energy and resources to change it. And so there's a way that we still want to kind of go with the way that it already is, right? And kind of flow from there, like where we kind of want to embrace our natural motivations that our mind has at this point. And then changes will happen and you can make changes, um, but hoping to just have totally different motivations and a natural flow and things that you like is not going to be that realistic. Much easier to just get yourself around people that have the motivations that you're looking for. And of course, you can get some momentum where the more you do something, that's how your brain's plastic. The more you do something, the more it'll be easier to do and feel more normal and so forth. The norms and standards things, in essence, is part of how momentum works with your mind, or the metaphorical momentum with your mind, right? When you do something, then it makes it more likely to do it in the future and easier to do it in the future. When you take an action, it feels more normal, even in the moment, even in one session of working on the computer for something like a task. Then once you get started, then it just feels more normal to be doing that. And then so you affect the norms and standards even in the moment and then overall as you take action. But it can be hard to jumpstart, and that's one of the places where, of course, it helps to get around other people. that have that motivation. And it's interesting how I did it, where I'm motivated to think in this kind of clear way and design things, and then I people that were motivated to just more specifically make money, network, focus on their appearance, and all sorts of stuff like that. Um, I could team up with those people, and I don't feel that motivated for those things. I'll do it if I have to. I'm not going to be silly, um, but that way I could mostly do what I do, and they could do what they do, and we're not always fighting our own, our own impulses. Bryce writes, speaking of setting norms and standards, when people go to live in another country that is very different from their country of origin, do people set up new standards and norms? Generally, when we get around a new group of people, and that's when people make like major kind of changes in their life fairly effortlessly, for better or worse. And this happens in college, right? College is like a whole new country, and people's standards and norms get all jacked up, or different at least. The reason I ask this question is because I'm going in a few weeks to live in a poor part of Mexico. Yeah, it'll affect you. Um, it's hard to say. It'll again, our brains are pretty plastic back and forth, so it can affect you while you're there. It could make a permanent change in some ways, or it could not. Um, Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily want to have take on a poverty mentality, or feel like it's normal to be poor. But it should be pretty relatively easy to combat that. Uh, and there's one of the things I want to get to even further with you guys. There's two things going on. There's your mind doing what it does to deal with gray areas. I've referred to this before. How it kind of makes you feel, and what you guess, and what your motivations are when you don't know. And then there's stuff that you can know. And there, I'm going to show you how to distinguish that much better. There's a way that I haven't really helped you with that quite nearly enough yet, I don't think. So kind of the other phrasing of the law of implication is that if you want a result, focus on building on what you know, and you don't ever have to stop doing that. You could just keep building on what you know. Your brain will mainly take care of the gray area for you. But a lot of people's questions can often involve, either explicitly or implicitly, it can involve, how do I know what's correct in this gray area? And often you can't know what's correct within a gray area. But instead you focus on where it's not gray, and then that'll lead to a discovery of another thing that's not gray, and then you'll build another thing that's not gray, that's clear, black or white or whatever. And the gray area will become lesser and lesser until you just kind of reach out and grab what you want. Jamari wrote, "I'll never complain about fairness at work again, David. Now I know when I get the urge, I can pose the scenario. If we were both doing the same amount of work, would that get me any closer to being full-time OMG, or nope? So why complain?" Right, exactly. Yeah, there's something about focusing on fairness and it just takes up focus. Like and when you're working with other people and on kind of a team, then yeah, like one of the first things I try to establish is getting everyone's mind off of fairness, and instead just what results we're looking for, what each person's supposed to take care of, and then for myself, right? If I could take care of that in 1/10 the time people think, then great, then I can do that. So I don't have to just act like I'm working 10 times as hard, or they're not going to find some other job for me. And remember, whenever your brain gives you some sort of message like that you should feel bad about something, there's another thing I can get into, where you're going to feel bad sometimes, but what you can particularly do is never agree that you should feel bad on top of that, or should feel bad about something. But yeah, it's kind of fun, like this idea of calling down your brain and saying, all right, you're telling me I should feel bad. Show me how that's going to help me, right? Lay it out for me. And not just a statement, oh yeah, it's going to help you. Like, it'll really help you, I swear. Not just your brain jumping up and down and yelling at you, but force your brain put up or shut up. Like show me how this is going to be helpful to feel these feelings, and if you can't, then cut it out, right? And tell me what you want, and we can work towards it. And if it makes sense, I'll work towards it. You can say to your, so to speak, you don't actually talk as a being, but you can lead your mind to think that. Mike wrote, it's sad these days. Alchemy recordings have made it so I'm too jealous of my alchemy time, so I've been working alone. That's funny. Deborah writes, David, isn't that the point, i.e., that we naturally gravitate to those whose values, motivations, objectives, norms, and standards resonate or are closest to your own and what you desire? Yeah, that would be the case, but you want to use it strategically, right? Sometimes you're gonna need something, like if you want to work out and you normally hang out with people that don't work out, then you're gonna want to go and you said this, like if you decide that you want to do that, then you can go out and find and get around people. Um, what's interesting is that the less the less strong your own norms and standards are that that are the kind of arbitrary ones, like for example, how regarding like exercise, the more the more you're flexible with your norms and standards, whenever they should be flexible. If you can prove something perfectly, then you have that as great strength. But then other stuff that you can't prove, the more flexible you are with norms and standards of quote unquote your own that you kind of feel naturally, like in your mind or from the past, the more flexible you are in that, the more you can get carried along on other people's norms and standards on purpose when you want, right? The more someone feels like money just isn't important, then the more they'll resist getting carried along on the norms and standards of people who do think that making money is fun and important or interesting or worth going for. And if you want to get carried along on the other people's energy, then you don't want to resist them. And by realizing that your own norm and standards are just kind of arbitrary, you just let it go one way or the other. Letting it go won't make you feel motivated to make money, but it'll stop resisting other people that can help you pull you along, you see? So we can have flexibility with our own norms and standards to the extent we have them, unless they're definitely correct. I mean, you can reverse some things, like the idea of letting go of fairness and justice can be your own norm and standard, right? Although I don't know if that's even a norm and standard now that I think about it, right? Or a standard. It's more of a maybe a I don't know if it's a method or an understanding or a boundary, maybe a boundary, just like property rights. It's more like a boundary. I need to think about that more, right? Bryce, right, it just goes to show that feelings like nostalgia, culture shock, and homesickness revert the brain into a stage of resisting. Right, exactly. Right. When you're around different cultures, sometimes you'll be around different cultures and feel, oh, this is great, I'm around different cultures. But then other times people be around cultures and feel like it's disgusting or clearly wrong. But then stop and think, hey, I mean, is that right? Or should I be more flexible here? Am I just upholding an arbitrary norm and standard? And if it's genuinely wrong, then you can figure that out and not adapt it. But if it just seems like not right to you or disgusting. Oh, good, Megan. So what I said helped make things clear. You said I never know for sure. Uh, thank you for building out the explanation and examples of scenarios, learning what to focus on and what not to stress over. It's getting clear. Excellent. And we'll keep trying to make progress there. Deborah writes, yes, I understand flexibility is very important. I was missing that. Thank you. Oh, wonderful. Okay, I'll nearly end it here. I'll read what Clown Clown wrote. I was thinking, and this is a real person. Looks like he has a job as a clown, right? Um, I was thinking about relationships and came to the idea that it would be effective to focus on creating good atmosphere as something to stand on in relationships, and then to focus on getting a smile. Does that fit in the idea of focus on one thing to get a win? Yeah, focusing on creating a good atmosphere is smart because it's contextual, right? You're operating in the context of the situation rather than just it's not that good of an atmosphere and you're just kind of staring at a person trying to force them to smile directly. Much better to have an atmosphere, and it's like the smile is the fruit, and you're trying to water the seed and have sunlight and have the right soil. meaning operate in the atmosphere to try to get a smile rather than to try to just directly go after a person to get a smile without focusing on the atmosphere. One of the cool things about seeing different cultures and traveling to different places, even learning other languages, which I haven't done, can do this because they have different words sometimes. Like literally, they won't have a word for one thing, and they'll have words for other stuff that you didn't think of. Like farfignugan, oneness between the driver and the road, right? Um, but uh, but it can help us, of course, to get a sense of like norms and standards that we have, the way that we feel like things should be. You have a norm and a standard whenever you think things should be a certain way. Um, and a lot of that we don't even realize, right? And so when we get into a different culture and different assumptions about those things, then one of the best ways to use getting in a different culture is to not even to question your beliefs or to question your standards, but just to notice them. And you should naturally be curious about them, um, and certainly question them if they're counterproductive. But just by noticing them, then you can think about them and think about if they're part of the method that you want. Bryce writes, "There's no English noun for plural of you." Oh, right, you got right. Like you guys is the closest we can come, or something. I think if I have it right. Okay, I will end the webinar here. Looks like an hour and 45 minutes. We're less than usual, but great. Got through it though. I did feel fairly sick and headachy today, but I felt pretty good during this webinar actually, so that worked out great. Good, Deborah. That really is an important thing. I know it's a little bit abstract. I didn't relate it to necessarily to a scenario, but you can, right? You can when I say something that seems abstract, just come up with any instance in life or think about something you're working on, and but don't just try not to think in terms of words and repetitive thoughts. Like force yourself to just think, okay, so I'm going to go and do such and such, or I'm going to try and do this or that, or I'm on an island with other people, and and islands are good because they're simple, and have a few other people on them, and then try to apply the idea. Yeah, you're very welcome, Michael. Michael wrote, "Thank you for going the extra mile even when not feeling well. What a leader. Business as usual. Hope you get well soon." Summer colds. I don't know if they're the worst I've gotten since I had a young son. A couple times I just got nailed for like weeks. It was just crazy with terrible flu, which I never really had before that I can remember in my life. Maybe when I was much younger. But this was not a big deal. Just a couple days, I think this will be. Thank you for all the nice wishes. That's so great. You feel much more confident that you can do it easily now in terms of thinking in scenarios. Right. You don't need to worry about vividness or even constantly thinking. If you just kind of what you can do, um, if you can come up with a question or like if you're thinking of a statement and you're not sure whether it makes sense, just relate each of the words or the main idea to a scenario. But then if you're thinking and you're making progress, then you don't really have to worry that much about am I thinking in terms of a scenario. But anytime that you kind of feel stuck, then kind of baseline yourself better. Go back into relating it to a scenario. It's kind of like that with math, right? You originally learn the numbers by relating them to like this many blocks, right? Or this, whatever, this many pennies. At some point, you don't have to always think in terms of pennies when you're adding numbers, right? But the numbers are based in something tangible originally, if they are. For some people, they never really were, and so math is always kind of this abstract thing. But for a lot of us, I know for myself, when I think in terms of math, I I tend to relate it to something tangible. Um, I make tens and so forth, and I have these math blocks that I did some tutoring with years ago, and it makes math more tangible. And once you have it based in something tangible, then you can think in terms of words and numbers without always picturing something every time. Although even the picture will kind of be nearby, almost in your mind. Ah, right. Mahir had that question. I read that. Okay. I think there was something I didn't agree with the stipulation. Mahir wrote, I had a question. If we stipulate that God's consciousness field is creator, God's consciousness field doesn't create consciousness fields. God creates consciousness fields. God's like a being. So God's aware of um, whatever God's aware of, just like with us, that's God's consciousness field. God's going to be aware of whatever is, whatever exists. So God will be aware of reasons, which is different than being aware of like every possible visual angle on the Grand Canyon, right? Or a statue. There's just like the underlying reasons that are the statue or Grand Canyon or whatever. Um, so God's aware of everyone's consciousness field and God's own is made up of that and whatever is just personal to God's awareness. So if we stipulate that God's consciousness field is God's creator of conscious fields, and that newly created, I can go on that, newly created conscious fields add to his conscious field, and absolutely, God can add every time that there's a new being aware of a conscious field, then that's more that God's aware of, and that if you define more in that way, would that be implying he is instantaneously aware of all conscious fields? Yeah, I mean, God makes the conscious field. God's more like continuously aware of all conscious fields. It's not like it's there first and then God's aware of it. God has to be aware of it almost before you're aware of it, probably, right, in order to make it. Further, does that imply that the accumulation of negative thoughts and mindsets, in fact, do more harm than good to him, similar to when your brain gets stuck in fear mode? God basically suffers as long as we're suffering, because God's aware of what we're aware of, as I understand it. That's, I think, the best answer I can give to that. So all suffering, and this is another thing about justice, is that it doesn't make sense for God to just be doubling all the pain in the world through, like people think that God's just, but again, Jesus himself gave that parable and other parables. I'm talking about justice. The idea that every time someone does something wrong, God's going to double it, right, and punish them extra, isn't quite how things work. There's a built-in mechanism in our brains where we get the implications of our thoughts, right? So when we do things, or when other people do things that are bad, right, that basically violate property rights and such, or when they believe, another thing that's bad for yourself is to believe that you should feel bad about anything. When you buy into that's lacking faith. When you think you should feel bad, that all of that hurts God and hurts the person doing it, and so forth. So we want to take care of our own, baseline and get ourselves okay, and then we want to help others, and ultimately helping others, we can help them survive and be comfortable, but we also ultimately, to win, we want to get our own ideas right and help other people get their ideas right over time. Additionally, wouldn't it suffice to just pray for wisdom, since he is all-knowing and instantly aware of my request? I think it makes great sense to pray for wisdom, and just in general that God's will to be done. But there's nothing wrong with specifics. There's nothing wrong with having specific questions that you kind of state almost as a prayer. There's nothing wrong with, I think that if I were to guess, and I'm guessing, but there's got to be some way in which prayer has like some kind of quantum effect on the world, a little bit like our own intention has one in our mind, and it probably, and so directly intending something and acknowledging God as you do it may well have a tiny effect, but sometimes tiny quantum effects can make a huge effect. Sometimes they don't, and there might be more to it. But being specific is good, but also just praying for wisdom. The good thing about being non-specific is that you can have clarity with non-specificity. If you just want wisdom, then that's correct. If you pray for understanding, you're praying for something that's definitely good. So it's good that way. Just like if you hope to, with any goal, if you just define it enough, but don't over-define it. Like if you're not even praying, if you just imagine and use the results formula where you envision meeting the person of your dreams or having the relationship of your dreams and what would happen after that, then you don't need to like imagine the hair color of the person, right? So you can keep things vague to the extent that what you know, like just focusing on what you know, but you can pray for a particular person to feel that, to be healed or something like that, and understand there's nothing wrong with intending that, or it's good. Like it can be nice to help someone to be more comfortable, and there is presumably a way that would help people. Yeah, certainly be careful what you wish for. I think that does relate as well. And be careful of the implications of your thoughts, right? Read what's in the bill, right, that they pass, that the legislature pass, metaphorically, like your thoughts, right? If you're the intentionality of your thoughts, um, like if someone intends to love their kids, then that's like the name of the bill that's being passed. But then you have to look at the content of your thoughts and your actions, and then you're going to get the implications of that, just like the content of the bill and what that'll actually lead to. Two kids in two schools and two varieties of the flu. That's great. You're so welcome, everyone. Deborah, Megan, focusing on. Oh, you're right. That's beautiful, Megan. This is actually really helpful. Focusing on what's clear is like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Yeah, I'm so glad you came up with that. I feel like I'd thought of that in the past at times, and I totally had forgotten about that. Right. How do you put together a jigsaw puzzle? You don't just. This is just wonderful to look at it this way. This is fundamentally how I solve problems. Is right. You start with the corners, right? Because those are the easiest to spot, and then you try and look for places where it's most obvious in terms of the like design, right? There's kind of distinctive features of like if there's somebody's face or the roots of a tree or something in the picture that you're trying to put the puzzle together. You look for the clearest, most distinctive places in the puzzle, and you look around. You don't have to look. It's not that you look in the context or not, but you don't want to limit yourself to. You don't want to put aside half of the pieces before you start, right? Just like if you want to have a relationship of your dreams, you don't want to decide that it has to be with this particular person. Like you don't want to limit yourself from people that could be great for you based on cut off things that actually are arbitrary that don't matter, right? So yeah, this is exactly what I've been trying to get at is and relate this to your self-image. If you think of yourself not as a person who methodologically puts together things like a jigsaw puzzle, you look for where things are clearest and you build from there, and you never need to stop building from where it's clear, right? Now, if at the point where you can't find the next clear piece, what do? You do like successive approximation or something that's similar to inference. You just try pieces until something works, right? But then that might lead to additional clarity. But you whenever you just need to, you try pieces at random to see what'll work. And it might not even be at random. You might say, well, all of these brown pieces, I can't tell which one'll work. I know the green and the blue and the other types of pieces, they're not gonna, or the ones with like a lot of green and blue in them, they're not gonna be part of this tree the part that I'm working on now, the jigsaw puzzle. But of the brown ones, I've determined that it has to be in these brown pieces. But I don't know which one, so I'll just start. Then you realize you don't know, you can't know, and you just do it one after the other quickly. And you don't think that you're smarter because you picked the right one faster, right? If there's 20 pieces, all of which could potentially fit, like with where you're at right now, the jigsaw puzzle, you just try each piece, and you don't hope that it's the first one. It doesn't make any sense. You don't hope that it's the third one. You don't relate it to your self-image. You just go boom, 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 boom until you get it, and then you keep doing things like that where it's just quickly trying different pieces until you're done with that part and you have new clarity. Anytime you find something that you can know, like that it has to be brown pieces or that the corner pieces where you start, then you do that first, and and then otherwise automatically you just want to go through the successive approximation or the trying stuff, and you want to do it like bloodlessly as possible, right? Where it's not attached to your self-image, you're not emotional in the wrong way. You can be emotional in a fun way, where you're like, great, I know it's one of these 20 pieces, I'm just going to go do it, right? And you can enjoy that, but that's you don't need to be frustrated, nothing. And if you look at your self-image like that, um, as that's like who you are, is you're someone that does jigsaw puzzles that way. And if you realize that pretty much any issue in life can be framed in terms of a jigsaw puzzle, in terms of you have the question, you have the objective, right? Or in this case, it's having the whole puzzle put together. Um, and then you just, again, focus on what you know. You'll reach limits of what you can know, and then you try stuff. Just like I do on these webinars, right? I try to delineate what I know, make notes, prepare in different ways, and then the webinar comes, and I'm just sort of trying things, right? Or I say what I can, but I can't plan it all out perfectly, and I realize I'm not gonna. it's not realistic for me to plan it out perfectly, and then I don't, and I'm at peace with that, right? Just like I'm at peace with trying the 20 different brown pieces to see which one fits, or similar to that. So excellent. Yeah, yeah, it's an engineering concept in general. But the crazy thing is that even though this is fairly obvious when we look at it this way, in terms of this scenario, do people operate this way? Sometimes, but their self-image is constantly popping up in a different way, right? While they're solving problems correctly, they have all these self-image issues that they're also trying to accomplish at the same time. And again, it costs a lot of money to uphold your self-image. And then there's like this Sarah that I read to you in this book. She got devastated by this comment from her boss. Her boss probably had his own self-image problem where he wanted to blame it on someone else because he didn't want to feel like it was his fault that things were done late. He felt like maybe it was wrong and he didn't want to feel like he was wrong. He wanted to feel like he was the good one, and so he blamed her, right? So these self-image issues pop up and they just get in the way. And when we realize to let go of that that's arbitrary, and we want to get things foundational. Excellent. So glad you said that. Elizabeth writes, we're all one. When we're hurting one another, we're hurting ourselves. Right. And we're hurting God for sure. And then to the extent that we identify with another person, then we're hurting them. And we will make it more normal for people to hurt each other, and like in our head, right? However you act, that's going to affect the standards and norms in your mind. And I don't think we can fully escape those, right? That's kind of how our brain stores things. And that's why I don't have negative self-talk. In my head is I made it more and more normal to not have that. But when we hurt someone else, right, we make it feel normal for people to hurt each other, and we give people little signals that they should hurt us at certain times, or we hurt ourselves, like, and feel guilty or ashamed. Yeah, I know. He talks about shoulding all over themselves. Exactly, Tony Robbins. It says that when people say should, they should do something, they end up shoulding all over themselves. It's kind of a reframe that he does. But what I think is people will hear that and they still won't get to the bottom of things. So I want to make sure that we deeply understand how about how it works with should versus method, and also that we should never want to agree that we should feel bad. However bad you feel, that's how bad you feel, but you don't need to feel bad about it. Isn't all thought prayer? Very possibly, Brian, especially if you kind of feel like you continually acknowledge God, right? There's a certain I like that phrase, acknowledge God, right? A certain kind of awareness and directing your thoughts partly to God, or acknowledging that God's kind of, makes it all happen and so forth. Jessica writes, thank you, David. This is life-changing material. Truly grateful. You're very welcome, Jessica. Frederico, thank you, David. I hope you feel better soon. Get some nutrient-dense foods into your body. Juices and smoothies work great. Absolutely. Yeah, I've been doing that. I got some fresh new green drink and stuff. Then you can trigger a detox of that at the same time that you're sick, right? If you haven't been smart. But yeah, Deborah writes, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, and then you can help those around you with their masks. That's a great illustration, actually, of what I'm talking about in life, is you get the oxygen mask on yourself. You don't then grab 3 or 4 more oxygen masks just to be absolutely safe, right? But that's cool. And this is another scenario that we can see, right? You don't. It could just be a static image, but then if we develop it, if we add things and subtract things, then it becomes a scenario. Anyhow, right, so we put it on ourselves. We don't need to grab. We don't want to conclude that we want more and more oxygen masks for ourselves. We get enough for ourselves, but we have to be taken care of enough that we're not just dying, right, and so forth, or just desperate, when it comes to money and so forth. If someone's just desperate, there's just a way that it's too difficult to help others. And truly, or when there's a big problem, it's hard to focus, right? When there's a clearly big problem that you have, just hard to think well. Because your mind it's like a powerful magnet that your mind keeps getting back to. So we kind of take care of ourselves in a reasonable way. And then we can help others, but we don't want to just help others. We're not looking to lose, right? We're not looking to lose gracefully. Losing gracefully means, I help other people get fed, and I help sustainability and electric cars and this and that. All of that is just survival, right? Helping orphans and everything. It's great. Helping other people get their oxygen mask on is terrific. Another thing we could say is get your oxygen mask on yourself and you can help others, but then we want the plane to get landed. We want to land the airplane. We don't want to just survive until the plane crashes with oxygen. So that helps me to develop that scenario. Um, we want to be looking to win in life, not lose gracefully. Almost completely, I think all I ever see is people looking, everything comes down to helping others just means helping us all lose gracefully. Or until God comes down like Deus Ex Machina, right? Like God from machine and just fixes everything. Well, we just kind of survive long enough for God to fix everything. If that was the case, God would have already done it. So, so great. So, but focus on winning. Excellent. All right, guys, wonderful. Ended up with, I think, 2 hours after all because of the wonderful puzzle metaphor and such illustration. Okay, I will end the webinar here before I have another blowing the nose episode. Thank you, guys. Thanks for your patience and everything, and wonderful, wonderful interaction again. I'm so grateful for the interaction on these webinars. Take care, guys. Night, Neil.